I've been recommending CBD for its therapeutic benefits for over 10 years. I've been asked recently as to why I don't talk about Epidiolex, which is the prescription version of CBD. So, let's talk about it. Hey everybody, it's Dr. David. Hope you're having a good day out there. So CBD, as many of you know, cannabidiol, is the non-intoxicating main cannabinoid that has lots of therapeutic medical benefits, but does not have the intoxication of THC. Okay. And, it's been something that had been identified because hemp products are higher naturally in CBD and very low in THC. A person who uses hemp products, even though the flowers themselves can look very much like marijuana, one doesn't get high from using it for those kind of reasons. But of course, CBD has had lots and lots of benefits, and probably the earliest usage of it was being discovered when it comes to things such as seizure disorders. That's one of the first things that was being used. And you may have heard about what's called Charlotte's Web, which was really the first mainstream. It was used for a girl named Charlotte who was having intractable seizures. Nothing else was working, and they came up with a concentration and a dosage that worked for her, and thus the CBD boom from a therapeutic perspective got started. Now, I first learned about CBD, had heard about it, but really kind of learned more about it in about 2011, and it was an interesting story. I was seeing a patient in follow-up, and this patient, this child, had a birth injury where there was oxygen supply that was cut off to the brain, and there was unfortunately what we call hypoxic encephalopathy, which can be irreversible brain damage that happens if there's not enough oxygen, especially to a newborn's brain. And the family thought that the hospital itself had been at fault for some of the things that had gone on. But these were people who were in the natural world, and they wanted to know if anything would be helpful for their kid. And so I had seen the child several times at this point, and the dad, and rightfully so, was a pretty acerbic guy. He really kind of would be a lot of times grumpier in the room with it. And but I mean, because I felt that it was because of his anger. I don't know that that was his natural, who he was or not, but that's kind of who came across. And so on this fourth or fifth visit or several, he's sitting there. The boy's playing on the ground. The mom's also on the couch, and he's just kind of has this like nice happy grin to himself, kind of just like laying back, chilled, as if like the weight of of the world had been taking off of his shoulders, even though I knew there was much weight there. And so after a minute or so, I said to his wife, I'm like, "What's with him over there?" And she's like, "What?" I'm like, "He just seems so calm and at peace." And she's like, "He started taking CBD." And I'm like, "Oh, well, tell me about it." And they started telling me about Bluebird Botanicals, which was the company that he had been personally using, of which I first had started to use. And he told me how he figured the dosing that was available, and through the Realm of Care, which is a nonprofit organization that has both worked on formulations but also advocacy for CBD and for special needs children, etc. And he said, "Yeah, since I started taking it, I'm just feeling a lot better in my head. I'm feel like I can relax and think about other things." And I was like, well, that's pretty darn interesting. And so that's when he literally told me what product to use, what dosing he used. And the way I've done many times in the past is, how do I take an adult dose and figure out what an appropriate dose to give a child would be based upon fractions of body weights and what I can find in the literature, etc. And I started using it, and I started having some success with it, and really helping some kids calm down. Some kids were having seizure control that was better, and it was really quite a neat little thing. And one of the things that the realm of carrying this organization I was talking about, they were actually working with Charlotte's Web at the time. So even though he had told me about another company, they'd been doing most of their work and advocacy, as well as yes, Charlotte's one was helping funding the program as well, to get the advocacy out. So a few years go by. It's 2014, and legislation passes in Florida for children over the age of 12 who had two particular seizure disorders. Okay. though, as well as, and they were a form of epilepsy, along with people who had muscle spasms, cancer, or terminal illnesses. And there was then this legislation passed, and the establishment of the dispensaries, the medical marijuana treatment centers, MMTCs. And at first, all they were selling was CBD, but just for those four particular conditions. Now, I did have some of my patients with cerebral palsy and muscle spasms. I certainly had a few patients with seizures, and I was able to, because of some, I did have some of my children with autism, my patients, who were having those symptoms along with their autism. And so I started being able to use, although we were hoping the autism symptoms would get better, we were justifying to the state because they also had these other medical conditions, which were part of the legislation. And those kids started getting better, which was, of course, very nice. In 2016 is when Florida put on the ballot for medical marijuana, and where I was then became a certified physician to be doing THC, etc. But then comes around, and it's in 2018, and this is where this Epidiolex, which we'll spend really most of our time talking about, became available because it became FDA approved, and it was the first CBD product that was FDA approved. There was actually, even before that, a product called Marinol, which was a synthetic form of THC that we were allowed to use for limited reasons for people who, if they were having wasting syndromes, if they were having low appetite and we needed to get them to eat, those types of things. It was FDA approved for that, but certainly wasn't being widespread available. And this really kind of became more widespread available. But still, from the FDA perspective, only those things that it was FDA approved for would insurance companies be able to have to pay for it. Okay. It was available over the counter, but a lot more expensive, which we'll get to. So the thing about this Epidiolex, which were, there are a few things. First of all, obviously, it was a plant extract. It was plant-based medicine, which, of course, that's not something you very often can get from a regular pharmacy. So that in of itself, from the holistic world, the natural world, functional medicine world, it was great to see that the FDA was actually approving a plant-based medicine, and that was great. Okay. It was gluten free, and of course, with my patients, being many of them having gluten sensitivities, of course, that was a wonderful thing for them as well. But these two epileptic syndromes, one's called Dravet syndrome, one's called Lennox-Gastaut, and then the third thing that was added was actually for the muscle spasms, but it was tuberous sclerosis complex, which they're these tubers, these masses that grow in the brain that would cause seizures and other types of problems as well. And then it became available. For people who were 1 year and above. And I think I may have misspoken. In 2014, the law was for 12 and above for the CBD, but this bit was available for 1 year old and above. So, of course, until things got a little bit changed later down the line, when full medical cannabis passed, this was also a possibility where the 12 and above one wouldn't be for the legislation that had passed through the dispensaries. Okay. Now, we moved from the epilepsy, and then, one of the things that physicians are allowed to do ordering, if something's not FDA approved, but there's a similar condition or there's research, we are allowed to write for things that are called off label. Okay. So that was kind of neat also, so we could do that. But again, it was more about the insurance coverage. Okay, now as far as the Epidiolex goes, it was also very interesting because it was very concentrated form, 100 milligrams per milliliter. And if you know that, that's actually a lot of milligrams. It's a very concentrated form. And one would typically start at like 2.5 milligrams per kilogram twice a day. So that meant like a 22-pound kid would get 25 milligrams of CBD twice a day. If they were 88 pounds, 100 milligrams, which is really high. If you've been with me for any of my patients, I really don't ever use those types of starting doses. Okay. And then those numbers could be even doubled, tripled, quadrupled per dose, according to the FDA, which, if nothing else, was a really great thing because it justified that if I did have to go to higher doses, even if I was using over-the-counter products, the fact that the FDA actually approved these rather astronomical doses based upon safety and effectiveness and research and everything, it certainly gave me a lot more comfort when I was doing, even half of those doses with my patients using over-the-counter products. Okay, now, Eat the highest amount, which would be 10 milligrams per kilogram per dose. That means like an 88-pound kid could be taking 400 milligrams twice a day. And overall, I've never prescribed anywhere, or recommended, I should say, we don't prescribe, we recommend, anywhere close to those types of doses. Now, interestingly, once medical cannabis came about, we were able to get it from the dispensaries. One of the very first seizure patients that I had seen was a man, I believe he was in his 70s, who 50 years prior had fallen off his bike, had a head injury, and started having seizures, and was having daily seizures for the following 50 years until we met. So I put him on what was considered a pretty small dose, especially for an adult, 10 milligrams twice a day. And within a couple weeks, the guy stops having seizures. Okay. At the time, he was actually taking 3 different seizure medicines. The neurologist seeing how well he did, because he'd never been seizure free on those seizure medicines. But he then came off of one medicine. And then he was still having no seizures since about a year later to came off the second medicine. And the last I heard, he was taking 1/2 of the dose of the third medicine and still seizure free after all of that. So obviously, that's a great knowing that was only 10 milligrams twice a day. We never had to increase the dose. And I don't think I've ever given more than 200 milligrams per dose. Okay. Now, the question that we posed at the beginning is, why don't I talk much about Epidiolex? Okay. Few reasons. Number one, it's a CBD isolate, okay, which means that they are just isolating this one particular ingredient. But as you know, one of the things we've talked about is plant-based medicine, how there's other ingredients, the terpenes, the other minor cannabinoids like CBG, CBN, CBGA, that are not intoxicating. So just like a more broad spectrum is kind of the term we use. And, we do feel that having all of those in there does bring, the plant offers it in this manner with all of these different ingredients, and we should be respectful of the plant. And that's why we recommend doing that. So of course we want terpenes in our products. We want to see if there's other minor cannabinoids that could help. But also, Epidiolex is sweetened with sucralose, the artificial sweetener. And the thing is this, I can't figure out how much is in there. I've looked it up. I've looked for certificates analysis. I've looked at the package inserts. It's an inert other thing, and I guess they don't have to list how much is there. So I have no idea how much people are actually getting exposed to sucralose. But let's face it, most of my pediatric patients especially, they're not getting exposed to any artificial sweeteners. So I wasn't so thrilled about that. The other thing is this. If a person didn't get it covered, a 6,000 milligram bottle costs $1,000. If you had to pay out of pocket for it, okay? And there was really no certificate of analysis at all, so I don't know if they were growing the plants, if they were pesticide-free, mold, mycotoxin-free, heavy metal-free. It doesn't say. And the companies that I prefer has that for every single batch listed, as I know I've talked about before. And I want to make sure that while I'm giving something therapeutic, that it's also safe, or as safe as it could possibly be. And I really don't have that kind of confidence in Epidiolex since they don't give us that information. Okay, so as you may have heard me talk before, the company that I've most commonly used is called Miriam soap, and they do have 100 milligrams per ml. They even have 200 milligrams per ml. But for comparison's sake, a 6,000 milligram bottle that costs 1,000 of the Epidiolex is under 200, 197 if buying it from Miriam's. But the other thing is this, Miriam's allows you to pick the terpene. So many a kid with seizure disorders or whatever, they may have also hyperactivity or sleep issues or different things. And so the fact that Miriam's lets me pick different types of terpene boost, the pain boost, the energy boost, the focus boost, the calm boost, or can even pick whichever particular terpenes we want to put in there, that to me is a great advantage. Okay, because if I'm treating somebody with a treatment for their seizures, but I can also help their attention and focus, or I can give them more energy if they're more sluggish, that's obviously great to get 2 or 3 birds with one stone. Okay, so what is my take overall? If a patient qualifies and it's financially the best thing for them, by all means, I would be happy and have written for Epidiolex for patients. Okay, but also as my grand recommendations have always been to avoid artificial sweeteners. I want to have something that's full spectrum. I want to have third-party testing done. Okay, so if it were me, all things considering, and finances wasn't the consideration, I'd be picking an over-the-counter product like Miriam's just because you get all of those other benefits. So that's the reason why I don't talk so much about Epidiolex, because I do think that there are better options out there, but I guess now that I've talked about it, I'm talking about it. So hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.